So thank you, Felix, for a wonderful talk, looking at where the future of the CSO's responsibilities will be. I think a lot of it is a bit overwhelming and sounds very futuristic, but Felix assures us that he's already seen lots of parts of it actually happening. So please do catch up with Felix while he's here, and I'm sure he'll be happy to explain a lot of these trends and technologies. It may sound very esoteric, but it is real. So thank you once again, Felix, for that wonderful talk. And I'd now like to call on stage Mr. Suresh Sridharan. He's Principal for Security, IAM and DB Security with Oracle. And he's going to be talking about the evolving corporate IT environment and how to realize the benefits and to balance the risk. So please welcome on stage Mr. Suresh Sridharan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully, I should keep you as awake as Felix did, and I'll try my best. And you can tell me at the end of it if I succeeded or not. And I guess I've met with some of you before. I'm with Oracle. I came into Oracle from Sun. I've been in the Asia Pacific region for the past 4 years, and before that, was based in Redwood Shores and Menlo Park. So what I'll talk today is basically, some safe harbor statements about what we're going to talk about, but we'll skip through that. It's essentially what Felix mentioned, an extension of that, if you will, which is what are the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace that are impacting identity and access management, and why identity and access management to start with, right? What's its importance in the new infrastructure, if you will, and some of the the way you look at securing an extended enterprise. You heard Felix talk about Internet of Things. There's mobile, social. There's a whole bunch of forces that are coming together, and it's impacting what somebody from an information security perspective is actually putting in place as part of the infrastructure. How do you secure that? And what is an extended enterprise? We'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll also look at some of the mobility trends and opportunities, because there's significant opportunities, and hopefully share some of the stories with what we're experiencing with some of our customers, and how are they gaining productivity, how are they generating extra revenue. Where's that money coming from? But obviously there are risks associated with that, right? So before I start, right? So how many of you actually have active identity access management deployments within your infrastructure, managing users internally or externally? Just a show of hands. A handful. Cool. So if you look at what exactly is impacting identity businesses, okay, it's basically, I would put it in these 5 categories. And no surprises, Felix, obviously you see Internet of Things as well, right? So let's start with mobile access. Some very interesting things happening here. It used to be that people basically had a mobile device for communication, right? The 3 C's as they call it, right? Which is, I use my phone to communicate, I use my tablet to consume, and I actually use my laptop to create. And that's basically what's happening in the industry today. But what people are expecting is, if the minute iOS came out and all the Apple devices came out, people now expect that to be the experience of enterprise applications. Right? I want my email in the exact same interface. I've got used to it, and I bring my work and my personal attitude into work as well. If I'm doing that, you who's sitting on the other side in the enterprise is facing a new pressure, because user experience is driving it, right? It does not matter whether you allow a device or not, right? You allow people to bring a personal device or not, people bring it, right? So once you actually look at that kind of a perspective, there are challenges you face as as an IT professional. But if you look at customers, take one of our customers in Australia, ANZ Bank. One of the things they did was, as a pilot project for the frontline bankers who actually work with corporates, they enable them with iPads with 8 apps on them, okay? And what these guys did was, they basically would go to the customer, and this is like going to the large conglomerates in Australia and talking to the finance guys and saying, okay, where's this investment? How do I hedge my currencies? Stuff like that, because they're working with all these finance professionals. Now, in the past, in the absence of the tablet, what they were doing was they'd go have these discussions, come back to the office, because all this information is actually stored in the office, right, inside the network, and make decisions, go back to the customer. You're looking at multiple iterations. Once they put these apps on the iPad, gave it to them, they would walk into the customer's office and essentially say, okay, currencies, these are the different products that I have. Instead of this, you probably want to go here. Literally real time, they were looking at, making decisions, enabling the salespeople make decisions. The minute they did that, they monitored that for about 2 quarters. They found 2 major pieces of information that came out of it. A 2% increase in revenue per employee, a 2% reduction in the cost of the actual sale that happened. In addition to that, they also found that the ability to cross-sell products, right? If they were going in to talk specifically about, some exchanges, right, foreign exchange, and hedging bets, that Australia does a lot of trade with China, you want to, hedge your bets, but you want to change that and sell something else, right? They were able to do that, and they found that there was a 35% increase in cross-sell of products. Significant difference. So obviously, what you're looking at is now a salesperson who didn't have an iPad is now walking in with an iPad, with apps, is generating revenue, right? Who's going to complain? Right? Will you take $10 of additional revenue, or are you going to forego the revenue and say, no, there's a lot of risk? Nobody's going to do that. So the onus is essentially on all of us here to say, how do I bet against the risk that these things open up? Right? That's essentially what we're doing here. Right? That's what we're seeing as part of the identity business. Why identity here? Right? Who's the user? You want to get to that. In the past, it used to be I put a network wall and I'm safe inside. Those days are over. Right? You need that. I'm not saying you don't need it, but you need to start looking at a different set of nexus of forces here, which is essentially what's the data that's being accessed, who's the user, and what is the device from which they're coming. That's your new perimeter that you need to protect. Right? That's where identity is important. Right? The next thing is around social identity. I'll give you another example. How many of you actually make purchases online? Just a show of hands. So pretty good number, right? What is the one place that you hate when you put something in your shopping cart and you're ready to buy? Right? What's the one thing that stops you from making a transaction? Registration process? There you go. 70% of transactions, all transactions, stop at that stop. Essentially at that point, right? So what are people doing? They're saying, okay, you don't have to register. Can you log in with your Facebook? Can you log in with LinkedIn? Whatever it is, right? Some social identity. It's generating revenue. Right? You're not going to say no, but is there a risk? Absolutely there is. Now, you need to start linking identities of people who are actually using, say, something like Facebook or LinkedIn, whatever it is, right? Whatever the external social identity is, into your infrastructure. But why do you want to do that? Because you want to get to a position where you say, what can I next sell to this person, right? You want to get, what's the buyer profile? Who's this buyer? What are they buying? Right? That's basically where social identity comes in. You want to be able to tie that into a population, basically go back into things like big data analysis and things like that. Cloud security. Now, most of you have corporate travel that's taken care of, right? Some travel agent who takes care of it. Now, if you notice off late, at least for us, for those of us, say, from Oracle, we know that our itineraries actually get delivered by Tripcase, right? Now, guess what? Tripcase is actually a cloud service provider. Right? In the past, I've actually signed into, I had a personal account with Tripcase because I was doing a lot of complex things with it, which we won't go into now, but. So if I already had an identity established with Tripcase, and now Oracle starts delivering the same itinerary, which is my work itinerary, how do I match up, if I'm Tripcase, how do I match up those two identities to say, yes, this is the same person? Can I sign in with my Oracle credentials, get access to all the trips? Can I sign in with my personal email address, get access to the trips? What if I move on from Oracle, right? What happens then? All of these things come back to corporate, right? It comes back to the enterprise that's managing it, both on the cloud service provider side as well as the enterprise side. That's the other thing that we're seeing. Now, the identity provider, this is a very interesting one. So, a lot of telcos basically have enormous information about subscribers, right? So do banks. So does the government. So we actually have a very interesting initiative that's happening in UK, where the government is saying, look, I have a lot of small and medium businesses. All these SMBs are selling products, but they don't have the infrastructure to stand up, say, a CRM system, a logging, complete identity infrastructure and stuff like that, right? They don't have too many customers. They don't need such heavyweight stuff. So what if I'm a SMB, I want to start selling my products online, right? In the UK, there's something interesting that's happening where the governments are saying, well, you have your driver's license, we manage it, you log in and you see it, right? You log in, see your retirement profile, what your retirement funds are, all of this you're using the same identity. I'll start exposing this, and small businesses can actually use that for completing transactions, and they charge per transaction. So suddenly the government has now started getting revenue. Right? If you look at the revenue model, all of a sudden the government did not have a role in this, but by virtue of actually enabling the authentication, they're making money. Telcos want to do the same thing. We're working with a couple of telcos who are really in the same space as well. Right? Very interesting things. Now, if you look at all of this, it's the user's identity. Right? You have the infrastructure in place, that's fine. Right? You have the networks, you have the basic security you need to put the perimeter, perfect. But secure the data, secure the identity, secure your assets. That's basically what you need to look at. Finally, Internet of Things. This is a very interesting thing that, kind of building up on what you mentioned, Felix. We're working with a customer of ours in China where I'm assuming all of you have appliances at home, multiple appliances at home, right? What happens when something goes wrong? Call up a technician, right? Somebody shows up home. Now what this appliance manufacturer in China is trying to do is when you call up, they actually want to basically look at what is wrong with your appliance remotely from their data center. From the customer service portal, they're going to connect to your appliance. If it's a washing machine, they're going to check, okay, your belt is wrong. There's something wrong with the belt. You need to replace it. That's the impact of Internet of Things for people like us, in our daily lives. Now, what is the impact if you turn back on the infrastructure side? If I'm a manufacturer and I know the exact model of the washing machine that you're running, I know how many parts I need to actually push back into my production system. So you're thinking of a very different world of lean manufacturing, right? Now, why identity here? I need to know who you are in order to associate the appliance with you so that I can ship it to you, right? I need to know where I need to ship it from. So it comes back to the same thing. Who is the user that's actually requesting the service? If I don't know that, I can't complete the transaction, right? So you're getting to a point where all of these are transforming identity in general. And that's something that we're seeing with a lot of our customers. So if you look at what the key business drivers that we see are, typically it's about, how do you enable an extended enterprise? As we said, right, Tripcase is an extended enterprise as far as we are concerned because it's serving our travel purposes, right? If you have some mom and pop store that's actually supplying the belts for your washing machine, that becomes an extended enterprise for you, right? So things like that is something that's going to, it's only going to increase. It's not going to reduce. So how do you enable an extended enterprise? The second thing is how do you reduce complexity? Because all of a sudden you're probably talking about partners who are not really IT savvy at all that need to come into the system and start working with your environment. That's the second thing. The third is converging services. You want to be able to say, I'll provide these identity as services to all these different entities, and they will be able to say, like what the UK government does, right? Let people log in. Simple as that. Right? Simplification of your upgrades and the whole process of maintaining your infrastructure. So these were the key things that we started looking at about a couple of years back in driving our product directions as well. So essentially what we are talking about is a single identity platform that basically covers the cloud, the enterprise, and mobile. Right? As part of this, we'll kind of dig a little deeper into some of the more interesting things around mobile. But we've actually seen with the release that we put out a lot of significant, I'd say, customer embracing these this particular version. 900 plus deployments on the latest version that actually is the platform for identity. And some of these customers are here. But if you look at this, the scale is really what we need to be looking at, right? So as a platform, if you basically look at your identity infrastructure as a platform, then you can start saying, okay, I'm now going to make my business agile. I'm going to be enabling my CMO. I'm going to be enabling my business bring in revenue, because you're not tinkering around with your infrastructure too much. You're just going to be expanding it. Right? What are the three areas that we're looking at from an identity perspective? It's the basic access. Who has access to what? At what level should they have access? That's basically a definition time, and then you go back and do it at runtime. And the next is around governance. I go back post fact and find out, did they really need that access? Was that valid? Should that have changed, and so on? And then the directory. If you look at the Internet of Things, right? All these little devices, things like, belt in your washing machine or a chip in your refrigerator, all these are going to be represented in, mostly read-only entities, which are directories. And I believe that directory is going to play a very large role in this. So if you look at the infrastructure, you need to have directories that in each instance will probably have to go into hundreds of millions of users or even entities. You need to have, supporting mobile and social cloud kind of infrastructure, and BYOD as well. So let's just skip through this, and I'll talk a little more about what we're doing specifically with mobile applications. So how many of you actually have a BYOD kind of initiative internally? Just to show of hands. Okay. And this is kind of representative, right? So you basically, Gartner came out with a survey, and this was about 2 months back, where they said about 9% of all companies worldwide actually have a explicit BYOD policy in place. And they believe that that's going to go up to about 40 something in about a year's time. And since by 2017, they expect 70% of all organizations to essentially have a valid BYOD policy where people will be mostly working with their own devices, will not be using corporate devices at all. And on one hand, it saves IT cost, but on the other, it exposes you to risks. So we'll look at, specifically what are the things that we are seeing with many of our customers, just purely from mobile applications, right? One of the things is obviously, if people are bringing their own devices, how do I separate out corporate data from, personal data? And obviously, you don't want to be backing up things like Facebook information, right? If you're basically protecting the whole device, that's what you'll end up doing. You want to, store the extra information, not necessarily. So the next thing is about, extending identities as a service. We'll talk a little more about that. And the third, which is I think very important, is about single sign-on. Now, commoditized is what people were talking about 2 years back. SSO is all commoditized. Single sign-on is commoditized. Use the same username, password to access multiple applications. They're all enterprise applications, what the heck, right? But go back to what we were talking about, the online shopping experience. Right? I want to be able to reduce the number of transactions that, that get slipped through because I need to register. How do I build that into an SSO infrastructure? Right? We have standards like OAuth and other things. We won't get into the technical details, but this is a very critical infrastructure, because if you were to go in and say, I now enable my users to use multiple different authentication mechanisms internally, then you can go back to business and say, oh, sure, you want to get somebody else, users to register using Facebook? Sure, we can do it. But if you don't have the infrastructure in place, you're going to struggle. Right? So we're seeing a resurrection of the single sign-on access management in general. And obviously, you want to do this as a platform. The benefits of, just reduction of costs and risks, because have one place to go in and look at your risk profile and stuff like that. So this is, again, some scattering of data that I've painted. If you look at it, you actually have about 90% of CIOs actually expect to have more than 25 mobile apps. Right now, literally, as we speak, some of the customers in India basically saying, I want to enable my salespeople with a mobile device and apps on the devices, because I want them to be able to go and sell more, right? This morning I was reading Thomas Cook. They actually have a mobile app that their salespeople actually use, and they've been able to connect with customers better, revenue increases, right? And then there was another one, I think it was JP Cements, right? Again, the same article was talking about that, where they said, in order to check quality of cement that's being used in construction, they're providing an Android app, right? Which people go in real time, they look at these construction sites and push data back to their servers. Now think about those kind of scenarios, and that's basically what the trend is today, right? What it's helping is basically new business initiatives that you couldn't think of 5 years back, right? And all of these people are walking around different places with mobile devices. What lands up happening if they forget the device somewhere? You want the ability to at least secure your corporate data. Right? You don't want people to get access to this information. How do you secure it? Right? And then you don't want the user's personal information. You just want corporate data. If they lose the device, you want to be able to wipe the corporate data, forget about the person's stuff that's there. The second thing is, the number of mobile apps being developed is basically going to be far more than the number of PC, desktop, any of these apps by 2015. And obviously there's the growth in the cloud-based apps as well, which people will be using on the mobile. So from an IT perspective, opportunities, fantastic, but what are the risks, right? Because that's really what you want to mitigate here, right? The first thing, if you look at this, 74% of the companies allow some kind of BYOD. They allow BYOD. There's no real policy. Policy is about 10%. The rest of them is basically ad hoc. Right? Yes, you can do it. No, you can't do it. The bigger thing you look at there is actually the cost per device. This is for a smartphone, and this is kind of averaged across various global various parts of the globe. $250 per device maintenance. If you put an iPad in there, it's about $600 to $1,000 depending on the what exactly is the functionality you're enabling. And this is basically coming from McKinsey. Right? It's very interesting when you start looking at the cost that IT has to bear in order to support these initiatives, the risk it's taking on. But on the other side, it's actually enabling huge growth in revenue. So how do you balance these out, right? And it's great, BYOD is allowed. Everybody has a ton of apps. How do you secure it? There are two methods people seem to follow. One is the device management route. How many of you actually have an MDM solution that you put in place? So a handful. Now, if you look at MDM, they lock the whole device up. It's basically, I protect the whole device. I don't care whose it is. Everything in the device, I'm going to control. It's a good move, but there are risks associated. Again, you're looking at personal data being stored, and do you really want it? Yeah. It's an issue, right? So the other one is mobile application management, which is I secure just those apps on the mobile that belong to me. I don't care about anything else. Everything else is not my problem. My problem is the data that's actually sitting that belongs to me, which is a valid approach, right? And this is basically what we are seeing a lot of customers actually talk about. In fact, even Gartner is talking about it. Let me just flip back, and I don't think I have that slide here, but even Gartner is talking about it, where this, in a webcast they did about a week back, they basically came out and said, there are 4 or 5 different things you need to look at. MDM by itself falls short, right? MDM is good, but you also need this, map back to identity management, map back to, content management. Those are things that they're looking at, and they basically are suggesting, don't just narrow yourself to just an MDM approach, but broaden it and go for a whole policy around what are the kind of apps you can have, what is the content, and how can you back it up to servers and stuff like that. So it's a wholesome solution that you need to look at, and that's something that Gartner is talking about. So from our perspective, we basically look at this, again, going back to the platform kind of play that we have, right? You want to be, on the one hand, you have apps, the CRM, ERP apps. Those apps are eventually going to make their way onto the mobile device. Whether you like it or not, whether we have a policy or not, it's going to be there. And then you also want to have a platform by which you can actually develop these apps. So you develop these apps, there's a mechanism by which you actually push these apps onto the devices. The life cycle of the app is maintained. And then the more important thing is actually securing these apps. When I talk about security, I'm not really talking about just the application management. It's about how does it tie back into your identity management system. And essentially what that the platform story here provides is an ability to kind of leverage the same infrastructure that you use in the backend as well. For example, if you want to develop different applications across platforms and multi-channel applications using the same infrastructure, in order to integrate it, it's the same infrastructure that you have in the backend, right? And then for security, it's exactly the same. So your single sign-on mechanism, your provisioning mechanism is all the one entity that you use for apps, applications, irrespective whether it is a desktop application or a mobile application. That's kind of the vision that we are trying to drive. So what does that mean? I'll give you a simple example. New employee joins a company, right? Joins your company. what's the first thing you do? Provision them, they get into the HR system. That's where they get in. That's where really the first point, source of truth, if you will, right? From there, you need to give them an email account, right? They have a business role that they actually have in the organization. What if, when I do that, I actually say, this is a salesperson, and these are the apps they can get access to. It's as simple as that. I'm just extending my identity system, identity and access management system, to say, this is the app that this person needs to conduct the business, the business function. Now, I can extend that one step further. This is a manager in the sales department. So a manager should have access to these extra functionality, while someone who's a representative or sales representative for a particular account will have a different set of privileges. Same thing with accounts payable. What if I can enable that? That's basically what we are trying to do. Okay, we believe that having the same infrastructure to do it on the mobile, on your web-based application, it's basically the best way to go, because it gives you an ability to look at reporting or governance and compliance and other things in one place. The second thing is single sign-on. You have password policies that you set for your applications. What if I can go back and say the same password policies have to be enforced on mobile devices? Okay. Just another little bit of data here. About 70% of all mobile apps today store the password in plain text on the device. 70%. It's a staggering number. It's not encrypted, nothing. As long as I get access to the device, I have a password. Can anybody take a guess of what's the most common password? Password. Password, right? Now, how much does it take to break someone who's got password as a password and it's stored in plain text? And that's usually people share, use the same password for multiple applications. It's very common, right? Think about the risk that it actually exposes. And what if I can actually enforce the same set of policies, even if it is a mobile app? And that's the vision that we are trying to drive here. And obviously, single sign-on across apps, whether it's a native app or a browser-based app, or it's your web-based app, right, which you're using on the desktop. It's the same set of credentials. This is your life, because you have your own risk policies that you put in place. You can change those policies, it gets enforced. And even from a user's perspective, it enhances user experience. It's pretty straightforward and simple. And the other thing is obviously, let's assume, and this is something we saw from, I'll talk about that now, with one of our banks. What if I can tie risk to this? Someone's accessing this enterprise app from Nigeria at 3 in the morning. There is a risk associated with that, right? What if I can tie that back here? Today you have no way of doing it with an MDM solution. There's no way you can do it, right? What if I can tie this back and say, well, somebody accessed their bank account at 3 in the morning from a mobile device, and 10 minutes later, someone accesses the same thing from India. Is there a risk associated with it? How do I map the risk across channels? Those are things that you can actually do. And finally, you can actually start exposing these as services, REST-based services. It's pretty simple, so different applications can actually integrate. So instead of creating a silo using MDM on the, literally as another vertical, what we're looking at is actually embedding the different things you need to secure mobile apps as a horizontal that goes across. And this is part of the platform that, the identity access management platform that you put in the infrastructure. This is kind of the story and the vision that we are basically, we are executing on. I'll talk about two different customers, very interesting, solutions. Suncorp, it's a bank in Australia, and they had a mobile app, existing mobile app that their end customers were using, banking customers were using, right? This is retail banks. And there was a little bit of a problem because the mobile app essentially had a restriction that in a day a person can transfer not more than $200, right? It's because of risk. But the business was not happy because the business said, look, that's putting restrictions on my business because a lot of people are just driven away from the app. They don't want to use it. I want to take that restriction off or at least increase it. And obviously, the risk folks, along with the IT folks, said, no, we can't do it. So one of the things we did was we actually enabled, the second was, of course, user experience. Typing a username password is hard, right? Even on a mobile device, even if it's an Apple, Android, it doesn't matter, right? Still a bit of work. So they actually work, we work with them to do what's called a PIN-based credential. That is the first time only, just the first time you enter the username and password. And for certain transactions, that's converted to a 4-digit PIN. So if I just want to see my balance, I don't need to use the whole username password on the mobile. I just use my PIN when I fire the app. So is it a low-risk transaction? Absolutely. Can I allow it? Yes, I can. Somebody wants to make a transaction less than $200, go ahead, do it, because it's considered low risk. If I want to make a transfer of $500 or $1,000, then I'll say, well, now I see the risk levels going up. And based on that, I'll ask you to provide me something else, an additional factor of authentication. Now, this will be interesting because RBI is talking about transfers. One of the committees that RBI put together, I think it's the MOR committee, basically came out and said that they want payment banks where there is no loans or credit facilities actually extended. It's just purely for transactions, right? If that's the case and you're looking at financial inclusion, obviously things like mobile applications are going to have a role there, right? So at least that's what we believe. Now, one of the things that they did was they actually completely scrapped the existing app they had. They rewrote the app with the single sign-on infrastructure brought in and the PIN-based authentication. And we're still waiting to look at the exact results in terms of the kind of adoption, but the initial feedback we got was pretty significant, to the extent that they're actually willing to talk about this to other customers as well, which is interesting, right? So that's one of the more recent ones. The second one was with ANZ Bank. This was very interesting because the first time we had a conversation with the CISO, it was very interesting. I was at lunch with them, and casually he mentioned, there's some guy who actually wrote an app to access his bank account. Didn't come from IT. He just decided he's going to write an iOS app. He put it out, right? And the first week, he had 25,000 people download it. IT had not seen the app. And they said, well, we need to do something about this. That's really where the conversations actually started, because then we started helping them look at, what are the different things that we can help them with, purely from a security standpoint, from a risk management standpoint, right? And if you look at the existing GoMoney app, that's one of their, critical retail bank apps that the CEO talks about. GoMoney success is extremely critical for them. Right? That's one of the things he talks about. We also put in the adaptive authentication mechanism for fingerprint-based authentication, which is again interesting because for different levels of transactions, you want to be able to get an additional factor of authentication. They opted for that. So some very interesting things that we've seen. So I think I'll stop with this in a little joke, and this is with the Snowden stuff. Many of you may have seen this from Delbert, right? It says we lost all of our company data and backups too. Right? Next thing he says is, oh, don't worry, I hacked into the government's database, retrieved everything. Is this something I need to worry about? Well, not really. Everything's working fine. Right? So you don't want to be the next Target. Okay? If people haven't followed what Target did, they lost, the CIO lost their job. Their net profit went down 40%, one breach, right? And you want to look at what can I protect in my environment. Right? As this is from Frederick II, and he said, "He who defends everything defends nothing." Profane, it's a basic profound statement, right? You don't try to defend everything. You look at what are the key assets you need to define. Is it the data? It's the users. It's the research that your intellectual property that your organization actually creates. That's what you want to protect. And we believe that core, the heart of all of that is basically identifying who your user is within your infrastructure. If you know that, you know exactly what they should have access to, and you know what exactly you need to, when you need to allow certain risky transactions to go through and when you should not. So that's all I had. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Done. Either all of you are sleeping, or this is all very clear. One of the two. But anyway, I'll be around. Thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks.